It's about time to start. I don't want to stand in the way of anyone and their cold drinks at the happy hour afterwards, so we'll get right into it. Oops. So, yep, this is Application Lifecycle Management, or ALM, across 3 continents with Provoke. I'm Dustin, as the title slide up there says, so here we go. So today I'm going to be talking about TFS and some of the ALM features that are available to you that you can help leverage and as you walk through the development cycle yourself. So some of you people out there may be using TFS just as a source control. Some of you may be using it in some of the things I'm going to be talking about today. And hopefully, though, there will be one nugget, something new that you'll be able to take back to your jobs, to your boss, and say, hey, that's awesome. We should be doing this as well. So why me? Why should I be giving you this nugget? Yeah, sorry, it's supposed to be like that. Cool. So why me? Why am I giving you this nugget? Well, as part of my day-to-day job as a development team lead at Provoke, I've been given some tasks to research these features, figure out which ones will work for us, and working on implementing these with the development team. And I'll be taking you on our journey about how we did that throughout the talk today. So I'm going to start by giving you a pretty simple nugget. Some of you, this may not be a surprise. Others, you'd be like, wow, I didn't know that. So that nugget is, you can use TFS as more than just a source control repository. I'll be expanding on this concept today, also by walking you through TFS and using it, Provoke using it as just a source control repository to using some of the agile features we do today. I'll start with some of the reasons why we decided to go down this path and some of the foundation that we needed to lay before we could actually even start using the ALM features themselves. From there, again, we'll cover these features and the tools that we decided to replace by using TFS and some of the challenges we had while implementing them. And then finally, I'll mention a few things that we've identified as a company that we would like to do in the future and on the cards and kind of why and some of those benefits of those. So obviously the biggest reason we started to move and look at TFS as a tool that we could leverage within our company was change. We had lots of change. But there was one really big change that kick-started everything for us. And this was the growth of a company from a local New Zealand design-led company to being a new kind of global entity. So we had some planned growth. And if we jump back a little bit to 2010, we have an annual conference where all the employees go. And at this time, we had 2 offices, as you can see on the map, one in Auckland and one in Wellington. We had roughly 60 employees between these 2 offices. It was at this time that we all became aware of this plan called 5-on-3 to turn the company into a global player. So what does 5-on-3 mean? Well, it's pretty simple. It's 5 offices on 3 continents across the globe. Included the new offices in Manila, Seattle, and Singapore. And obviously the original 2 offices in Auckland and Wellington. So the original idea of this plan was supposed to take 3 years, but this was actually accomplished in December of 2012. So this caused us to be a bit more reactive because it happened a year earlier. So we had to start sorting out our processes and how we were going to work now that we were separated by time zones, land masses, oceans in between. Upgrading our TFS solution became an integral part of this. Though before we could, again, begin using these ALM features that I'm going to talk about later, we had to do a bit of groundwork. And one of the first decisions that we had to do was whether we would stick with our on-premises solution or upgrade to the cloud with Visual Studio Online. So there's a few pros and cons to each of these options. With Visual Studio Online, you get the latest and greatest well before any other versions of TFS. With on-premises, you get a bit more integration with other Microsoft products such as SharePoint and reporting services. For us, we decided to stick with our on-premises solution. And the reasoning behind this was fairly simple. There are two factors. And the first that was when we were going along this journey, Visual Studio Online was still in a beta closed preview state. Now we got, the reason we were looking at it in this stage was we got an invite to it from Chris Johnson, who at the time was our GM of Seattle, but now he's the technical product manager for of Office 365 for Microsoft. So this issue was a relatively small issue, but we just weren't quite ready to make that jump to a closed beta product. The other issue that we kind of weighing in our minds was the fact that we had some long-standing security agreements with some of our clients, and the complexity and time it would have taken to work with legal and rewrite these agreements just would have delayed the project for too long. So we decided and made the decision that we would stick with on-premises. Obviously, now with that decision made, the design had to change slightly with the other offices. So we could begin by looking at that. So some initial requirements that we had from the business and things that we needed to include were some geographically located proxies. We had one of these for Asia, in the Manila office in particular, which was hosted in Azure Infrastructure as a Service. And then Seattle had another proxy, which was on-premises, because at the time they had the hardware available to them in the offices to be able to do this. So effectively what this means was that with the main TFS server being in New Zealand, each time someone from Manila or Seattle downloaded the code, it was cached locally, and they didn't have to go out across the internet to re-download all their code from source control again. So one of the other core requirements that we had was the need for the internal TFS server to be published externally. There's a few reasons behind this. So at the time, we had some developers working off-site at clients or working in client-provided development environments. So they all needed access to their source code, and this was the reason that it was needed to be published externally, as well as the factor that there was a plan to give clients access to this and be able to track how projects were going, and keep track of how we're doing our jobs. So looking at this diagram, there's a requirement for two build servers. There was obviously a TFS build server and a TeamCity continuous integration server. Now, the reason why both was because we had an existing TeamCity continuous integration server, which I'll get into a bit more a little bit later on. So obviously this is a high-level diagram and design, so we're not going to cover all the pieces off, but this is kind of relevant to what we're going to cover today. So once this design was figured out, in its first draft, we kind of started running into a few issues. Some of these issues were caused by legacy upgrade issues that we had done before. So way back when, we were on TFS 2008 and did an upgrade to 2010. So this caused a bit of problems. Because in TFS 2008, there was basically no structure. Each team project was a project amongst itself at the highest level. There was no container. So these are obviously typically independent of each other. But certain scenarios where you branched could cause a few issues where they're obviously no longer independent of each other at that time. Very easy for reporting. in this scenario in 2008. Sequential numbers for work items, change sets, everything, quite easy. 2010 wanted to change this up a little bit and solve some other scenarios. So they introduced the concept of team project collections. So at the time, we got some unofficial advice from an ALM ranger, and we decided to start using TFS in the manner where each client had their own project collection, and then underneath that, team projects for their applications. So this way was very clear isolation for us, but it created problems and some challenges with reporting, which obviously in 2008 were quite easy because, again, everything was sequential and it was all in the same spot. So we kept using this way, TFS 2010, despite some of the challenges that were presented to us. And it really remained this way until we were looking at the design for 2012. So in an official engagement, we spoke to Rob Mayer. Some of you may or may not know Rob, but he was the first Visual Studio ALM MVP in New Zealand, as well as a host of other firsts in Asia for Scrum and Kanban. Based on his advice in this engagement, the outcome was we would effectively roll back to almost the 2008 way of doing things as part of this 2012 upgrade. So we would have one default project collection, and then underneath that in the hierarchy, we would have our customers and our clients as the team projects. And then underneath that, we would have specific areas as the projects themselves. But based on that decision, we created another issue for ourselves, which we kind of had to deal with. So now, when we're changing structures again for 2012, we had to migrate all of our separate project collections back into one main project collection. Out of the box, there was no migration tool to do this, where you wouldn't lose your history, your check-ins, any comments your developers have added to those check-ins over the course of, for us, 13 years in some cases. So after some research and some trial and error by some of the team, we came across this tool, this Team Foundation integration platform developed by the ALM Rangers. So there's a couple of versions of this. On CodePlex, you can get an experimental version, which has some of the best and newest features in terms of migration. Or there's a copy here, as you can see here, on the Visual Studio Code Gallery. Also, so now that we had this, we could effectively migrate all that history back into one project collection, and we were good to go. So all that was really left for us was to proceed with the upgrade of TFS itself. As we were running this in a virtualized environment, we effectively cloned the platform at this time. So one-to-one clone, obviously, is what you saw in the diagram before. So what that allowed us to do is run the upgrades, run this migration tool before we actually tried it in prod. This first run-through, this first test run-through, found a few issues. Nothing major pertaining to the overall structure or architecture of things. We fixed those up, and then we decided to then proceed with a production upgrade. This happened on a Sunday night from memory. So the developers and the team came in on Monday morning, and essentially for them, nothing has changed except for having to change the URL of the Team Foundation server. We did run into a few issues with permissions. This was kind of a side effect because at the time of the upgrade, the infrastructure team decided to change their governance model, where they gave control of more of the permissions and more of the project teams over to the team leads as part of the development and infrastructure teams. So, small blip on the screen. This just allowed us to change these permissions come Monday morning for certain projects, and everything was good to go. So once that was done, further down the track, all the hard work was done in our production upgrade. We could effectively perform an in-place upgrade when 2013 came out, I think about 9 to 12 months later. So now that we had a newly migrated, upgraded TFS environment, again, infrastructure changed the government's model, so we had a bit more freedom to roam around and do what we wanted to do. We could then begin looking at the ALM features and what we could leverage. So the first step of this, we took a look at what existing applications we were using and how they could be translated and then leveraged within TFS itself. So the first tool on this list, Insight, we use for bug tracking. This is a bespoke application that Provoke has built. And it's been around for a long time. And when it was built, it was a great application. It did its job. But as we grew, the application didn't scale. This wasn't helped by the fact that we actually didn't have the source code for this. So someone obviously didn't check in the source code TFS at the time. Although I think years ago it was actually Visual Source Safe. So that's all right. Go to Assist, the next tool on the list. This is a support tool from Citrix. When it's used for support releases, it's great, but we've tried to shoehorn some of our release management and our project cycles into this, and it just wasn't meeting our needs and what we needed from that. If you've ever worked on an agile project, you've probably used Post-it notes on a whiteboard. I know I have several times. It's not easy. Post-it notes fall off, get lost, you lose task, away you go. Trello is just a virtualized task board, which moves your Post-it notes to the internet. We're using TeamCity for our continuous integration server, which I mentioned before. .cover to calculate some of our code coverage, and we're using the test runner as part of ReSharper, which is the developer tool that the team swears by, to run our unit tests at the time. Now, there was a few challenges, I guess, in moving the team off some of the tools they've been using for years. And they were just too complacent, too used to using them, reluctant to change. So we needed to get their buy-in, as well as the client buy-in, that, hey, we're moving off some of these. TFS is the way to go. Here's kind of how we're going to do it. For example, there's one of the teams swear by Trello, use it for quite a high-profile client. They didn't want to move at the time because there was always an ongoing client engagement to revisit the whole client engagement model. And they were just waiting for this to finish. And the plan is ultimately to move them into TFS because that's where we would like to be for everything. So I mentioned before about the 5-on-3 plan with the offices across, oceans, time zones, massive continents. Looking at the list of tools that we do use, we realize that these old ways wouldn't work. We can't use Post-it notes and whiteboards and have someone in Manila or Seattle, look at it. You can, but it's probably not the proper way to do it. So you just can't duct tape all these together and hope something is going to work, and your projects would keep running smoothly as they have been. It really justified our faith in, in the decision that we made to use TFS in this way. We just had to keep working on moving people off these tools and getting to where we needed to be. So a lot of these applications, you'll see in the next slide, can be replaced by these three spaces. So really at a very high level, this is where we decided to begin focusing our efforts. Thinking about the applications, things like GoToAssist and Trello and Insight, these can all be replaced in the planning and tracking space. Looking at the developer tools was the next common sense step for us, really. It was going to help solidify some of the planning and tracking and then some of the team foundation tools and spaces that we were moving into. And also the Team Foundation build, this is a direct one-to-one replacement of our continuous integration server, which I mentioned before. So now that we've kind of have an idea where we're looking, I'll get right in and dive into these sections a bit more in depth and talk about exactly what and how we're using them. So within the planning and tracking space, you get the ability to manage your product backlogs, your sprints. You can run your daily stand-up straight from the web viewer with your task board. You get real-time Burndown charts. And to get this underway, I was part of a team. I was leading a team to use these new features and trial them. It was for a major project, had very short time frames. It had quite a lot of dev to get done, and a pretty much completely immovable release date due to some external factors. So pretty much any project most of devs in the room probably have worked on over the course of their career. So this client we were working on, they had multiple applications underneath their initial structure, which we mentioned before. So what we had to do, we then had to jump in underneath the default project collection, the team projects, and the areas. We actually had to create a specific team to work on this application. And obviously underneath that, we had to create our iterations or our sprints. So once we got that set up, laid out, and ready to go, we had to begin actually setting up the tasks with our estimated efforts within TFS. So basically, this was our first go-around. We took our design documents and our technical documents that we use for build, and we translated these to our high-level section as user stories within TFS. And then under those user stories, again, basic translation from our technical documents, we have the work items, which are a bit more in detail description in terms of changes we needed to do and how we go about them. So if we open up one of the work items, you can also see there's a bit more detail here when you're looking at it. This relates to the planning and some of the changes, and you get some more of the details about what happened for the integration of this change. And you can also see the history which occurred over time of this change and how long it took. So obviously these tasks as well, you can't see it on the screenshot here, but this is where you come in and you'll update your completed hours, it's where you put your estimated efforts, and you can update your hours remaining in this screen as well. This is something very similar you would have done if you were working with a whiteboard in previous, where you have your task card, the hours in the corner, you scratch it out, you put another update there so you can kind of figure out how many hours you have left on a specific task. And then from that, you would draw your Burndown on a whiteboard or a piece of paper, wherever you were. But in TFS, you get these two views. So you get your virtualized task board, where you can see the hours remaining, or in the first task over here, you get the estimated effort, which we think it's going to take to complete that task. And by updating those, you get your automatically generated Burndown. So going back to the project, the team who were involved on the project, they definitely found these two views quite valuable. This is where they spent most of the time at the outset of the project and through the duration of the build. Both views at a quick glance give everyone involved on the project team an immediate view of what was involved, who was working on what, and what the progress was on the project at the time. Keeping these task cards up to date, like anything, at the beginning, it was a bit of time chasing down the developers to make sure they were updating these task cards on a daily basis. And what this allowed was, the project manager could come in, look at the Burndown instead of having to chase us up himself, and quickly and happily report back to the client that, in this case, we were well ahead of schedule. And the project I mentioned before, because we had quite tight deadlines, you can see on the Burndown, at certain times, we definitely overloaded the development effort on this Burndown, on this project, and we could continually track that just to make sure that, we were finishing on time, and everything was done. So a couple of these two screens where the dev spent most of the time with some of the tools I'm going to take a look at in the next section. I think, personally, I thought we were well on our way to a first-up trial of using some of these features in our day-to-day business. So in 2012, there's a few new tools that are available to make the life of a developer easier. For myself and my team, we're working on a legacy system that's been around probably at least 10 years. It was one of our initial clients. So there's a few tools we break out from time to time to help us find any areas where we can improve or we can make better. Some of those, which are new in 2012, were the code clone analysis, which just finds pieces of code effectively that are the same. So many developers over time working on it, it's bound to happen. Another tool we run every now and again is the performance analysis, just to see if any changes we've made slow down our application or obviously increase the performance as well. But by far, the next two tools are easily the most helpful on a day-to-day basis, sometimes almost to the point where you kind of potentially take them for granted. So working in Visual Studio, you have the My Work window. This allows you to basically never have to leave Visual Studio again. Well, not again, but I hope you leave Visual Studio at some point. So this view here lives in Team Explorer, and you can see it lists quite a few things. It lists any work that you have in progress. So any changes you've made to the code that hasn't been checked in yet, and obviously from there you can see what those changes were. Underneath that, we have the suspended work section. So suspended work's great. I love it. Our team works in a particularly crazy space. We work in support space. We work in general small enhancement space and a project space as well. So we're constantly switching between different higher priorities that the client assigns to us. So with your suspended work, you can shelve it, work on something else, check that back in, and it'll appear in your in-progress window. And when you're all done that, you can then unsuspend your work and begin resuming where you left off. So some of the other things we have in this window, we have the available work items. So thinking back to the previous screen where all the work, someone's gone and created all the work items for you in the TFS web viewer, whether it's your team lead or your project manager, someone, the work items here will correlate to those, specifically the ones that are assigned to you. So you check in some work from your pending in-progress work window, some of your pending changes. You're like, what do I work on next? You don't actually have to go and track down anyone to ask what you can work next. Your first place to look is your available work items, especially if you're working on a project for us. Pick up your next task, and away you go. So we had some code. Next section down here at the bottom is your code reviews. So as part of some of our projects and some of the hairier tasks involved in those, we assign code reviews to some of our more senior developers. So within the code review section at the bottom, you know if you have anything waiting for you to actually look at. And from there, you can see the changes that have been changed, make comments on that, and send it back to the person who developed them if you're not happy with what's going on. So we spend a lot of time in this window. For us, we also, though, spend a lot of time in this next window. And this is the Test Explorer window. So as you can see here, if you can see here, we have 6,800 unit tests as part of our solution. And this window just helps us keep an eye on what's happening and whether we're refactoring some code, adding some new unit tests as part of project changes. And when we run these, they're conveniently grouped in past tests, not run tests. And if any fail, there will be a group of failed tests. So you know exactly which tests you need to work on. So a lot of our unit tests, they've been designed using NUnit, the original NUnit framework, and we've just continued to use this. And one of the great features of 2012 that's has been introduced was the ability to run third-party test frameworks. So obviously I mentioned before we were previously using .cover and ReSharper to calculate our code coverage, and ReSharper would run the NUnit tests. But now that's built and baked right into TFS and Visual Studio, so we can leverage that. I guess this fact alone, that we could now use these third-party test frameworks, really changed our thinking and our decision around our TeamCity continuous integration build, which I previously mentioned. So you can see with the Team Foundation build space, obviously I mentioned several times that you can run these third-party frameworks. Easily get information about the builds that are being run for you, and the ability to help you debug these builds more easily. So, well before I started at Provoke, there were attempts to set up a Team Foundation build server, and this didn't go as planned. Couldn't quite get it set up. So they decided to set up this TeamCity CI box as a proof of concept. Now, this proof of concept lived under a developer's desk. It was running on a desktop PC. It was running Windows Server 2003. So no support from infrastructure, no backups being taken on this box. So if it broke, we effectively would have to start from scratch. This server was also very disconnected from basically everything else we were doing. If you didn't go and specifically set up notifications for yourself on this TeamCity server, you would have no idea that your build failed. So you would have no idea if something broke, if your unit test broke. So, it was never really intended to be used for production, but it worked. It did the job we needed it to, so we kept using it, we kept running it. But we thought with the whole upgrade of TFS and what we had available to us and the ability for third-party frameworks, we thought it was time we grew up a little bit and have a proper kind of build server for our project. So trying to set up these build definitions for the project and get our code building properly, we did run into a few challenges. Historically, we had, as part of our solution, we had some hard-coded paths for this CI box and for our development as well. So this really needed to be reflected on our TFS build agents as well. So when these agents were set up, they were designed to be generic as possible, so the load could be spread across the four that we actually configured for this build controller. But while I was spending some time working with infrastructure on this, we realized that because we were making so many changes and changes to the working directories on these agents, that we needed to have a specific build agent just for our project. So we leveraged this by the use of tags, if anyone's worked with build agent before. So we set up a tag specifically for us, which meant in our build definition, we were always looking for this tag to make sure our build paths and everything were the same each and every time, and also no one else could screw up their own builds by using this agent. A few other things that we had to cater for were the fact that as part of our project, we had some very old active reports, if anyone's familiar with that, as part of the solution. I think it's version 3, and currently they're at 9 or something like that. We don't really do much with them anymore, and we're moving them to SQL reporting services. But in the meantime, we still have to cater for the legacy changes. So these DLLs for the active reports, we don't rebuild them all every time. So we catered for that by, on the build controller, we set up a custom assembly path. And what that means is it was just a folder in source control for custom assemblies, and we chucked in the DLLs in there, and each time something gets built, it pulls in those assemblies that we need, and obviously the build's successful and continues to run. So one of the other teams tried to, wanted to automate their SharePoint builds, which without our out-of-the-box setup didn't really work. So they obviously came to the conclusion that they needed their own build agent as well. So they set that up, and to fix that, they basically had to install SharePoint on the build agent itself to make sure that it had the assemblies it needed to run. So now that we went through some of this work, obviously creating these build definitions, worked out the kinks, and had some successful and some unsuccessful builds running, we were able to start getting some great outputs and some great reportings from this. So if anyone's had a look around, this is a widget that goes straight on your team dashboard. This widget quickly shows you an overview of your latest history of all your builds. So orange is partially succeeded, which means something like your unit test has failed. Red is it didn't actually build. And green is built, passed all your unit tests, and we're happy. So this widget on the dashboard, if you click on it, it then brings up a slightly more detailed build summary page. On this page, obviously you have lots of filters. You can filter your, the date, how many builds, how long you want to look at builds. If it was a specific person that was having problems building, you can filter by that. And then you can also go and check out your queued builds. So what's running, and if there's anything stacked up behind it waiting to be run, you can see what's happening in that space as well. So the real information for all these build reports really comes in handy when you actually have to start debugging your builds and you click on one of the failed builds in your list. So there's really two ways to view, debug a failed build. One is via this notification you can see here, and the other, as I mentioned, was clicking on one of the failed builds from the build summary screen. So I think the notifications are a much more simpler and basic view of the full build report. It gives you all the relevant information you need. So as you can see here, a couple of unit tests failed, so we know our issue right away. And then it lists any of the associated changes which have been checked in since the build was last successful. A good place to start trying to debug your build is looking at your very first associated change set, because that's what obviously has broken your build. So if you look at that, you can start figuring out what has exactly changed and figure out how to fix it. So these notifications, thinking back to when I originally set the team up and we were looking at the project, I jumped in and added a notification for the team as opposed to each individual. So what this meant was that anyone which got added to the TFS team that have been created, they'll automatically start getting these notifications. Sometimes I forget that, and the PM or a new PM on the project comes up and says, "What do I do with this?" Just ignore it, please. It's a bit different way that kind of we were used to with I mentioned the Team City continuous integration box, where you actually had to remember to go and individually assign a person to that build notification. So I guess the nice side effect that I quite like, obviously, to these build notifications is that it's so interconnected that you get your notification, okay, something's wrong, we jump in and fix it right away. And we also get to shame the person a little bit who actually who broke the build, which is always good fun around the boys and at the office. So I mentioned the full build report before, and you can get to this from the notification as well, or as I mentioned from the build summary screen. From the top left of the email, you can actually open this full build report and have a look. So very similar, again, to the notification, but a lot more information. So you can see, who ran it, how long it ran for, and things, as well as our failed unit tests. what you don't get in the notifications that you do get on the screen here is your code coverage. You don't have to have your code coverage as part of this. You can enable it or disable it if you want via your build definition. So you can see there, obviously, we've got 29% of our code coverage, and that's most of the code that we've done recently. As well on this full build report, you get a bit more information around warnings. These are very similar to what you'd see if you work in Visual Studio as well. And essentially they're a warning that something's not quite right. And you can see here it's just a feature is going to be removed in a future release of the .NET framework. So we know it's there and slowly working through that. These build notifications and things, they saved us numerous times as a team in terms of our application. We have so many business rules in this application that one little tweak, one little edge case here can change the whole other side of the spectrum. So we essentially create another edge case for ourselves. And our builds and our unit tests help catch some of those. So at the end of that, just coming to the end, that's kind of the end of some of the areas where we've decided to focus on with our original foray into these tools. We've been sitting on this for a while. We've been refining. We've been tweaking. And just kind of bedding it in and making it a more seamless process for us. So that begs the question, really, what's next? Well, I'm glad you guys asked that. So for us, there's a couple of things. One's an area of focus that in the company itself, they've had their own growth outside the growth of the company. And the other one is looking at our next upgrade of TFS. So the first area I'd really like to focus on, and have been involved quite recently in terms of helping with that, is testing. Our test team, they've grown from a team of one or two in the office to a team of 5, and we outsource some of that testing when required for larger projects. So anything we can do to help them with that and help refine this process, the better. So currently, the test team, they use TFS for basic bug tracking, and they love this. It's a direct replacement, which I mentioned before, for Insight, and it's simple. It's easy to use for them, and when they find lots of bugs, they can just rapidly chuck them in, and away they go. So one of the other things we're looking at for testing is a bit more use of the Microsoft Test Manager. So this will basically help us conduct some exploratory tests and some manual regression tests for us. And the ability to create your test plans straight within TFS is great as well, and allows you to quickly clone them. So you can work on separate releases in parallel, which happens for us. As I mentioned before, we can have the support releases and project releases, sometimes multiple support releases, and these can all run in parallel. So if we have any test plans or regression test plans, we want to start leveraging those features. One of the things we're looking at trying to do to accomplish that is actually changing the TFS template. So the default template, which have always been set up for TFS, is Scrum. So we've been using the Scrum template. And we're kind of in talks and debate about whether, for this specific application, we actually change it to the CMMI template, which is a kind of a continuous improvement template. The tester and I seem to be on the same page. We just have to figure out how to do that. So obviously the next area that we would like to focus on as well is Visual Studio Online. So as I mentioned before, Visual Studio Online receives the new features, the new updates earlier. linking back to the testing, we get some of the cloud-based load testing, where you can automatically spin up some environments. And then you have your continuous deployment to Microsoft Azure. The big thing for me, though, by far, is application insights. So this is basically a cloud-based kind of logging application. Currently, it's in preview. And when you're using application insights, you obviously can link this up to on-premises solutions in Azure. It can be anywhere. You have to point it at your production or your stage environments, etc., and you're good to go, and it'll start collecting and logging information. Now, we currently do this. Looking on the right here, this is some of our logging that we create internally for some of our applications. This has kind of evolved over time and been a kind of a decent effort recently to improve this and log more data. And what this application insights would do is the fact that we could actually push some of the load onto the TFS server to gather this data, to render this data, instead of actually sitting on our web boxes in production and kind of building the queries ourselves. So I'm really looking forward to that and being able to play with that on some of our internal applications when we actually do decide to make this move and upgrade to Visual Studio Online. So it's definitely in the sights of our infrastructure team for kind of the vNext version of that. So that's about it. I don't want to give away all our secrets that we're looking at things for the future. And that about wraps it up. And I'm going to leave you how we started. You can use TFS for more than just source control. Actually, I showed you some of the features that you can use, how we use them, and how we implement it in a few challenges we have. So hopefully there is that nugget I mentioned that you can take away and use in your own businesses. Cheers, and thank you. Any questions? No. Cool. Good stuff. I'll run through the compulsory slides, guys. Just some few other breakout sessions. Quite interested in the TFS extensibility one, so you'll probably catch me there. A few hands-on labs, and I'll be at happy hour later. And you can get me at CNDNLink on Twitter if you have any questions. Thank you.